Fear never conquered anything. I recently heard this statement and thought that's right. Fear never has conquered anything. It's always been the exact opposite. Fear has prevented steps from being taken. It has kept people stagnant. It has caused debilitation, inaction, and sometimes even backward movement. Residing in fear and letting it take over is not beneficial to anyone. Overcoming fear is a whole other result. There's fluidity, liveliness, action, and forward movement. An entirely different scenario occurs when fear is not the overriding emotion and response. We know this. It makes sense. We understand what fear does to someone. Maybe we've experienced it ourselves. Maybe we've seen it in others. It does have a noticeable impact, and we are to pay attention to it. Fortunately, for our sake and for the sake of others, Jesus did not allow fear to control his life. It didn't make the decisions for him or dictate his actions. Fear was not the overwhelming presence in how he lived. We see this in two distinct ways in our passage today. Both are in regards to the man who had been ill for 38 years. 38 years. That's a long time. It's hard to fathom what that would be like, to fully grasp an illness that endured for that period of time if you had not experienced it yourself. We can speculate and draw certain conclusions, however, it's not the same. And while we don't know the type of illness affecting the man, we do know it prevented a life of interactions and relationships. We know this because this man had been lying by the pool of Bethesda for a long time. He had been waiting to make it to the healing waters, waiting for a change to happen, waiting and living with an illness that prevented him from being able to move to where a new experience was possible. That was the understanding of those healing waters. Once the water was stirred by the spirits, then the first person that entered them was healed. This man had been unable to enter them first because someone else always got there. That was what he explained to Jesus when Jesus asked him, "Do you want to be healed?" The man didn't say yes, and he didn't say no. He just said what had prevented him from being healed. Jesus, being forthright, told him on the Sabbath, "Stand up, take your mat, and walk." In other words, you are healed. Go about your business. In this interaction, the first way in which Jesus did not allow fear to take precedence was in approaching the ill man to begin with. Those who were ill, the invalids, as the scripture states, the blind, lame, and paralyzed, were on the outskirts of society. They were forgotten, avoided at all costs, and seen as dirty and unclean. Coming in contact with such an individual would make you unclean. So you didn't do it. You walked around them. You didn't make eye contact. You surely didn't have a conversation with them, and you definitely didn't go near the pool called Bethesda or any other place where the ill were gathered. It would cause you to be labeled and ostracized by society. Jesus didn't care about this. He didn't care about what people would say, what they would think, or if he would become unclean. He cared about those who were ill, those who were ostracized, and those who were on the outskirts of society. Jesus was about inclusion, and he made that point with every step of his ministry. Fear of how he would be judged or perceived were not factors for him. That is huge and an unbelievable way to live and minister. And it doesn't stop there. Jesus, being Jesus, did this healing on the Sabbath. The Sabbath, a day when no work, no cooking, no healing, no exertion of any type was to be done. It was to be a day of rest, and only rest. That was the law, and everybody was to abide by it. If you didn't, then reprimands were in order. After all, observing the Sabbath did come from the Old Testament, which was the governing scripture of that time. It was also what was used to enforce the rules and, to a certain extent, invoke fear in those who thought of doing otherwise, except with Jesus, who healed on the Sabbath because it was the right thing to do. It was what was needed. It was what was called for. It was one way of changing the perception and walking straight into the fear that was present. Not many people are able to do this. Yes, there have been moments when maybe we've tackled our fears head on, but to do something that goes completely against the grain, to side with those on the margins of society and to make it public, that is a whole other ballgame. It appears, though, that is the game Jesus is encouraging, stressing, and pushing us to join. For we are to follow in his footsteps, right? We are to live as he lived, right? And we are to move in a way that fear does not hold us back, right? Right. We are to do these things to the best of our abilities and then some. Push ourselves once we've reached the point when we don't think we are able to go any further. Truly embrace the type of inclusion Jesus demonstrated and professed. Listen to the voice of Jesus, as opposed to the one in our head telling us to stop or turn around. Living in this way will propel us to new heights, and it will be professing our own truths, the truth the gospel speaks to, the truth that brings us together, and the truth needed in our world. It will change things, and it will change us. The other night, when we had the get to know each other better dinner at our house with church members, Jeff asked a series of questions to each person, including to himself and to me. One of those questions was, if you could pick any point in history to go back in time to, when would it be? When it was my turn to answer, I said the time to when my grandparents were growing up, to see what they were like and how it was that they were living. I thought that would be interesting to observe. Later that night, after everyone left, I began thinking about that question again. A new point in history entered my mind that I would want to return to. I would want to be present when Martin Luther King Jr. gave his I Have a Dream speech during the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. I would want to be there as 250,000 people gathered to hear words that will always be a pivotal part of the civil rights movement. I would want them to wash over me, because even though there was major fear during that time because of the intense racial inequality and discrimination, Dr. King kept pushing forward. He kept speaking. He kept marching. He kept calling people to be accountable, to rise up, to overcome their differences and see their similarities instead. He had a dream. He voiced that dream. He lived that dream. All without being prevented from doing what was needed by the turmoil and unrest around him. He did not succumb to fear. We must not either. Whether it be in regard to the small things or the big things. We need to follow these examples. Stand up. Preach the gospel and live out the messages we hear from this passage and from Jesus. And do it by walking right through that fear. For there is no better time than the present. That is the reason for the why then and why him. Jesus had no better time than at that moment on the day when it just happened to be the Sabbath, with an ill man who was lying near the pool where healing occurred. There was no valid reason for Jesus to have waited. There wasn't someone better or more deserving. It wasn't going to wait until the next day. Jesus was an act now kind of guy. We are to be an act now kind of people. Not wait until the perfect moment or until the fear has all gone away. Instead, know this is it. This is the then, and this is the individual, the situation, or the circumstance. This very moment. This is it. Will you pray with me? God, help us to find the confidence and the strength that Jesus had when he faced the fears around him. Amen.